Hey there, Bob here, joined today by Tim Sullivan on the Designated Pundits. Today we're previewing Nashville SC for the 2024 season. Tim here from Club and Country Podcast is joining us today, and he's the guy I first met when I joined NASR. Talk a little bit about where we can find your work, Tim.
Yeah, the majority of it nowadays is on the podcast. Just search Club and Country or Club Country USA on your podcast provider of choice. Still write a little bit online, just don't have enough time to do it all the time nowadays. ClubCountryUSA.com. And then all of the social platforms at Club Country USA is the best spot to find it.
Awesome. So today we're previewing Nashville SC, one of my top 5 clubs in Major League Soccer that I like to follow outside of my Red Bull. You know, when we don't have any offense, you gotta watch something to get it out of you.
Well, maybe Nashville's not the choice for that.
Well, we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. You have top producers and then nobody else, but I'd rather have a goal scorer than no goal scorers on my team. Let's talk about last season. 13, 10, and 11 regular season record. 39 goals scored. That's not enough, but they still had a +7 differential because they only allowed 32. That is tied for lowest in Major League Soccer. They finished 7th in the Eastern Conference and did get that coveted playoff position. Let's talk about last year for Nashville SC. A lot went right, a lot went wrong. Not quite what we expected, right?
Yeah, it started off really strong, and then I think they even took it to another level during Leagues Cup, and unfortunately for them, both ending up without a trophy and burning themselves out for the remainder of the regular season was kind of the main storyline that I think anybody would bring up when they talk about Nashville's season last year. Just didn't have enough gas to continue. I think they were 2nd or 3rd in the East at the time that Leagues Cup started, and ended up finishing 7th, had as bad a run over those final few games as they have in their entire existence in Major League Soccer. So, obviously there are reasons, excuses, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, I think Nashville fans, front office, coaches, players would all say not good enough over that second half of the season. And they'll be looking to be more first half Nashville than second half Nashville.
Yeah, they went on a 1-6 stretch starting at the beginning of July there. Not looking good there. They did lose the last 3 games they played. They lost to Red Bull on decision day, and then the 2 playoff games against Orlando, home and away. Very interesting. Let's talk about the goal scorers a little bit. We had a lot of 2023 contributors. Obviously, Hani Mukhtar, 15 goals, 9 assists. That's your number 1. That was plan A, plan B, and plan C last season. Fafa Pico, 5 goals, 1 assist. You had Schaffelberg, 3 goals and an assist. Teal Bunbury, 3 goals, 1 assist. Sam Surridge, 2 goals. And Dax McCarty with 1 goal, 2 assists. Let's sum up this contribution chart for us, Tim.
Yeah, like you kind of mentioned in the open there, it was pretty much Hani Mukhtar or bust. I think going forward, people are a little bit more excited about Sam Surridge. He was a midseason signing. He was really good in Leagues Cup, actually, and then basically didn't produce at all once MLS play started back up. Flubbed a few chances, and when you are only around for half the season and you're not match fit to go 90 every week, you aren't going to get a ton of chances. So when you flub the few that you do get, that's how you end up only scoring 2 goals as the starting striker for a team that has Hani Mukhtar playing next to you or behind you. So I think that was a big part of why Nashville struggled. They said, okay, we're going to plug in this big English guy, and he's going to come and be the game-changing center forward, and that just didn't end up coming to fruition. I think the other thing to look at is the 2 wingers that they had, Fafa Pico, who is no longer here, Jacob Schaffelberg, who were out there to provide an element of speed, and they did that a lot, but unfortunately, it didn't turn into enough end product especially again, that second half of the season. It's going to be, I think the main theme of the conversation is that second half of the season was kind of uncharacteristically poor for Nashville SC. And I don't think there's anybody, including Mukhtar, who is blameless for that. And that's why you see him with 15 goals and 9 assists. He's the only guy who had double-digit goal contributions. Nobody else was even particularly close.
So this was an easy one. I'm going to throw a couple of superlatives at you. MVP.
Yeah, that would be one Prince Hani Mukhtar, Hani Abubakar Mukhtar. Basically, he's a former league MVP, was on league MVP pace in the first half of the year.
Yes.
Nashville didn't live up to expectations, and in part it was because he wasn't able to carry them like he has in the past.
What about an overperformer?
Yeah, I think the primary overperformer, there are a couple options. I think center back Lucas McNaughton is the big one. He was brought in kind of as preseason depth because Nick DePuy, who had signed from LA Galaxy, ended up having a season-ending injury before he ever even trained with Nashville SC. Essentially, he was traded and then failed a medical. I guess would be the most simple way to put it. But he stepped up, and when Jack Mayer or Walker Zimmerman were hurt or unavailable for various reasons, which happened far too much last year, that was another part of why Nashville wasn't up to its expectations. McNaughton stepped in and did a great job. Honestly, he was not somebody that Toronto FC fans were sad to see leave. To be quite honest, they were kind of celebrating it when Nashville acquired him. But instead, he stepped up and was a contributor to one of the best defenses in the league. So I think that's something that came as a very pleasant surprise in a season that had too few of them.
1,173 minutes. That's what you look for, out of someone who you want to be an innings eater there in the back line. And underperforms. Who's the main? You gotta hang one of them. Underperforms.
Yeah, I think there are a couple options here. Maybe following the U.S. men's national team is coloring my perception a little bit, but I think Shaq Moore didn't live up to the very high expectations that were on him. And then I think Surridge is an obvious choice just because he only had the 2 goals. He was expected to come in and maybe have double-digit goal contributions just in the half of the season that he played, and that obviously didn't happen. I think he would probably have to take the cake, but at the same time, I'm seeing the potential that he put out there. I would not expect him to be in the running for the underperformer award or whatever.
Yeah.
Negative
I
award
superlatives because I'm a middle school teacher. It's yearbook time of year, I guess. I don't know. Let's take a look
most
at
likely to break out. I think I have him.
Okay, yeah, even better. Let's take a look at some of the players incoming and outgoing. I'm going to make this graphic a little larger for those of you watching along because I know yellow is a tough color to see on a background here. Incoming players, Tyler Boyd. I love this addition. I think this is going to help alleviate some of those issues of only one player contributing on offense. Drew Yearwood, a player who I've watched over the course of the last 2.5 seasons at Red Bull. One of my favorite non-daily starters over last year. He's had a lot of issues, but I think he's going to contribute. We'll talk about him more. Also added Mackenzie Gaines and Amar Sadik. Outgoing players, Dax McCarty, that's one. I feel like he lost his last step last year. I was actually very surprised to see that he signed with another Major League Soccer team, especially Atlanta. I thought he would have called it quits rather than go to the biggest rival for his biggest club. But, Fafa Pico is on his way out, Akiloba, and Nick DePuy. Would any of those players have been a projected starter on the 2024 roster?
I think probably not. Like I said before, DePuy never played for this club. Unfortunately, came in injured, and his option was not exercised. Lobo was out on loan all of last year, and they essentially just let him go. He was not expected to. He was the huge striker disappointment in a franchise that is maybe becoming a little too known for some of those with their big signings to complement Mukhtar. I think Pico would have had a role. He would have played a major role, but when you look at the incoming players and see Tyler Boyd over there, I think you can look at that and say, okay, we upgraded it in the same position with a more versatile player. Dax would have played a role. He was no longer the club's full-time captain. He passed the armband to Walker Zimmerman last year, and he said that was his choice. I think the club would have gladly let him continue being captain. The issue is what you mentioned, though. The mind is willing and the body just isn't there all the time for Dax anymore. He was not an every match player, much less a 90-minute every match player. And that's the sort of guy who has always been that over the course of his career. It hurt him to not be able to do that. And it hurt him, especially early in the year. He didn't play very well, which is kind of ironic because that was when the team was playing better. And then he came back after the break and played quite a bit better, but the team didn't. I think he would tell you that he wasn't always happy with his performance. But at the same time, he feels like he has more to give. He was disappointed to leave. He was trying to work out a contract situation with Nashville, couldn't get it done, and decided to go a little bit closer to home. The Orlando native, I was kind of expecting him to go all the way to Orlando and sign with Orlando City. But he is a guy who fans will miss him. I think the club will miss him in a lot of ways. But similar to Boyd replacing Pico in some ways. I think Drew Yearwood is the guy that they brought in to say, okay, we have some holding midfielders who have a variety of extremely defense first styles. And I think they look at Yearwood and say, he's a guy who's going to try some of the stuff that Dax has tried over the years. And they need a little bit more of that connectivity from back to front. And so I think they believe that Yearwood can replace Dax and possibly be, just a 5 or 6 years younger version of Dax as well.
Yeah, Drew Yearwood is a very interesting one. He's kind of a wild card. He never settled in with Red Bull. I'm not sure if he would have fit this system, but it was a mix of injuries. When he finally did get playing time, I remember there was one instance at the end of maybe the 2022 season where he punted a ball into the stands and hurt a fan that left him on the bench for a little while, and then he just never worked his way back in. Big, physical. I wouldn't call him fast, I'd call him quick. He's my kind of player. I really like Drew Yearwood, and I'd love to see him succeed. And he's one of the few guys, I'm really rooting for on Nashville this year, Drew Yearwood for sure. And I think that is, he has everything Dax doesn't have at this point in Dax's career, where, he has the legs, he has the ability. Maybe he doesn't have the game intelligence that Dax has, but you guys just went right back to Harrison to, replace like for like. There's a nice little streamline from Red Bull to Nashville. You got Sean Davis there too. Dax and Sean Davis were actually both captains of Red Bull. Very interesting to see.
Alex Muyl.
Well, we don't talk about him.
Yeah, I know. I think that's something that's actually kind of a theme of what Nashville does. There are a few clubs, probably the main two being Red Bull and Toronto FC, where they look at players that those clubs kind of don't have a use for anymore and say, we'll take them and fit them into our system and it'll work out better. It has worked with Muyl. It has worked with all of the Toronto guys that they've grabbed, Jacob Schaffelberg and Lucas McNaughton, who I already mentioned, for first and foremost among them. I think looking at Yearwood, Nashville said, this is a guy that Red Bull deemed worthy of a young DP spot when they originally signed him. Even if it hasn't worked out there, we believe that talent is there and we can kind of take a distressed asset and get the most out of it.
Love it. And I hope he can. He's someone I'm definitely rooting for. Also, Adam Mackenzie Gaines and Sadik. We're going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about our depth chart. But before we get there, before we pull up the official depth chart, I want to talk about coaching, play style, formations, talk about the X's and O's of what we're going to see on the field with Nashville this year.
Yeah, I think the main thing, what's interesting is that they did something different last year for the first time, which was play with a single holding midfielder. They went with a diamond midfield a lot. Typically with a Gary Smith structure, you're going to see two holding midfielders 100% of the time. And last year that was not the case, but you can see a 4-man back line or a 5-man back line with some pretty aggressive wing backs, but you're always going to see those two holding midfielders. Last year, I would almost say they tried to go with 3 instead of 1 when they went to the diamond formation. They had those shuttlers playing pretty conservatively some of the time, but you are going to see a team that wants to protect the back line, that wants to protect the goalkeeper. And historically, they've done a very good job of that. They've been among the best defenses in the league for each year of their existence. And the issue has been, how do you turn that into attack when the opponent doesn't let you get out into transition? It's a problem they're still trying to solve. They have not always had the right answer for it. Hani Mukhtar can be a one-man transition opportunity a lot of the time, but that requires the opponent giving you some space, giving him room on the ball to drive at the back line. So I think when you look at kind of some of the settled attack stuff, they will end up whipping in a lot of crosses, which is where having a guy like Surridge, who has the height that he does, I think he's like 6'2" or 6'3", very physical guy. He can head some of those home and otherwise kind of box guys out. But I think when you look at what they're going to do this year, it's going to be less about speed on the wings, which Schaffelberg and Picot were absolute speed demons out on the edges, and a little bit more about converting speed into a little bit more technical ability. And that's where Tyler Boyd comes in. I think he's a guy that they look at and say, okay, yes, you are a speedy winger, but you're also a guy who has a lot of the on-ball quality that Hani Mukhtar does. I don't think anybody's expecting him to go out and have that sort of that level of play, but certainly he has those characteristics, and they want to say, if it's not Hani, it doesn't have to be nobody. It can be this other guy, and Boyd is probably the first guy in a long time that they've had who can potentially be that sort of answer.
Yeah, I think he brings dimension, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he adds a little something that wasn't there before. I pulled up a depth chart for those of you watching on YouTube, which kind of shows kind of a modified 4-2-2-2. We have Surge up top and Hani Mukhtar just slightly behind him. Can we talk about the relationship up top?
Yeah, I think in the past it's been more of a traditional 4-2-3-1. I know Nashville has listed him as a forward because he scores a ton of goals, but Mukhtar really does kind of play behind that striker, and he in the past has wanted to be more of a distributor. A lot of his shots the year that he won MVP were actually longer shots after a dribble. They were not, traditional striker sort of things. So
Sure.
I think as you look forward, he's going to play more like that second striker where Surge is going to knock things down in the box and Mukhtar is going to run onto them, or Honey's just going to drive at the back line on the ball in space. Ideally, that's what Nashville wants to do. They need people to give them that space. And Surge is a guy who they're hoping just has the gravity to keep center backs from collapsing on Mukhtar. And if they do end up collapsing on Mukhtar, Surge is the sort of guy who has the technical ability to break away from the remaining center back and try to find an opening for Mukhtar to get it to him. And then I think when you look at the relationship between those two, it is so dependent upon what the wingers are able to do. Schaffelberg and Picot basically were the second striker instead of Mukhtar a lot of the time last year. Mukhtar was playing at the tip of the diamond, and they were using that speed to stretch the back line from Schaffelberg or Picot. So I think it'll be interesting to see if Nashville kind of tries to find ways to adapt that into the more traditional formations that they have been more comfortable using, including that 4-2-3-1 or a little bit of that 4-4-2 sort of characteristics where Mukhtar really is just kind of a poacher after Surge knocks things down.
Moving one level back to midfield, you have Annabelle Godoy and Sean Davis, but you also have some depth, Drew Yearwood, Anunga. Let's talk about who your two best are, and are there, the like-for-like comparisons here?
Yeah, I think when you look at Anunga, he's the only guy of those four who is really limited in attack. He's not going to be able to hit the long diagonal very much. He's okay on the ball, but when somebody steps to him and tries to put pressure on him, he's going to lay off a short pass and not do a whole lot. He's really kind of a traditional destroyer central midfielder. Godoy and Davis, they see as pretty interchangeable. Godoy is much more of a long shot sort of attempter, whereas Davis, your listeners know the Red Bull sort
he's
of guy.
He's very mediocre at everything he does. He does nothing exceptional and everything pretty good.
Yeah, it's exactly it. He's not exceptional in any way, but he's good enough in a lot of ways. And then I think Yearwood is the X factor. I think they would like for Yearwood to be able to beat out either Godoy or Davis, probably Godoy, because Godoy, I believe, is 32 or 33 at this point already. So he's a guy that is not quite falling off as quickly as Dax did last season, but he is somebody who's not going to be playing at the same level forever. And they would like to find a way to have Godoy kind of maybe move to a super sub off the bench sort of role rather than an every match starter sort of guy. And I think the fact that Yearwood has kind of that breadth of skill set that Dax had, that he might even have a broader skill set than Godoy, but I don't think he has the same exceptional high end skill set as Godoy in some of the ways that Godoy is able to really be an intimidator and also the sort of guy who can be that late runner into the box and just smash balls with his left foot. I think they would love for Yearwood to be able to maybe hone one particular skill to make his broadly strong skill set to have one standout characteristic too.
Love it. And this back line, we've talked about them a little bit, McNaughton and Zimmerman. Is that your best pairing at this point?
I think if fully healthy, the problem is you haven't seen full health for basically anybody back there other than McNaughton in a long time. I think Mayer probably beats out McNaughton okay. if the staff has their way. He's a guy who was banged up a little bit last year. He was drafted as kind of the guy that they expected to be the heir apparent to Zimmerman, but their skill sets are not redundant so much as they really complement each other. They're both big, tall, and pretty fast guys who are good on the ball, not great on the ball. McNaughton is a little bit more of a minutes eater, like you mentioned earlier. That's a good way to put it, because he is the sort of guy who's not going to lose you a match for the most part, and that's, as a center back, that's pretty important as a guy who could be a backup and potentially play some starters minutes. Josh Bauer is another guy similar to McNaughton who is pretty surprising in the way that he's been able to be a regular contributor. He's another level below McNaughton, but again, when he comes in, he doesn't mess stuff up, and that's plenty when you're looking at the fourth, third, whatever level guys on the depth chart.
Sure. And the fullbacks I absolutely love. I think this is one of the strengths of your team. I know you mentioned Shaq Moore was a disappointment to you. Mm-hmm. I watched him play against Red Bull, and he is a big dude. The ground shakes when he runs. I mean, it's one of those strange things. He's not a very large man, but he's big. Mm-hmm. He plays big. Yeah. He's physical. I love to watch him get up and down the field. And then you got Daniel Lovitz on the other side. Disappointment or not, this contributed for one of the best four-man back line in Major League Soccer. You do have Mouil on there somewhere too, which I love. Always a high energy player when he played with Red Bull. Like he has no breaks at all. However, first touch kind of like a cinder block, and deer in headlights with the ball at his feet. Just he's a better right back than he ever was a winger. He's like the reverse Pedro Santos. What do we have here? From these
I think Moore was not necessarily as disappointing from a defensive standpoint. Like you mentioned, this was an elite defense. I think when he was signed midseason in 2022, everyone was expecting, okay, he's going to come in. This is a guy who has a long-term reputation as an absolute pinpoint crosser. And for a Nashville team that is going to cross, whether it's a good idea or not, a lot of the times that's going to be their second offensive idea. They do not have a third one either. Moore has not been able to do those sorts of things the same way. Lovitz is a good crosser with the left. He's a really good set piece deliverer. Mukhtar does most of the right-footed set pieces, but Lovitz is able to do in-swingers or out-swingers based on where the ball is on the pitch. The thing is, both of these guys are very good defenders, but not elite defenders. They just don't have to be elite because pretty much it's Zimmerman. Zimmerman is so good that the team doesn't need elite fullbacks defensively. Joe Willis, very good as well, but I'm sure we'll talk about him in a sec. But Zimmerman organizes his defense incredibly. Moore and Lovitz just need to be good enough, and they always are. And the fact that they aren't contributing a ton in the attack is obviously one of the things holding back this team. But I think if you asked Gary Smith, would you rather have them be a little bit worse defensively in order to provide a little bit more in attack? He would say, hell no. I like them the way they are. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's one of the exactly things. We talked about Red Bulls earlier in this past week, and we just talked about FC Dallas. These are teams that would trade some goals conceded for some goals scored. I don't think Nashville wants to make that that trade at all. And with some of the moves, maybe Shaq Moore and Lovitz are asked to do a little bit less, and that really, you catch lightning in a bottle there. I really like what this team looks like on paper. It's just about getting it to go in real life. We didn't talk about the goalkeeper position, and that's kind of like the way I like to keep it. Like I like my goaltender to be sound and not used very often. Let's talk about what Joe Willis brings to this team.
Yeah, Joe Willis, man, I been scratching my head at times over the course of the last 4 years, helping run MLS Player of the Week, that he gets no votes when he has a 40 save clean sheet. I think he's only made Team of the Week once at Nashville, maybe twice. And that was when he saved a penalty and saved 3.5 expected goals in the season finale of 2022 in a win at LAFC. He's getting a lot of help around him. He's facing a high volume of low quality shots rather than any sort of dimes right on the doorstep. But he's getting the job done, and that's all you can ask of him. He's going to be a guy who likes to distribute by booting the ball long a little bit, but he's okay with his feet. Again, in a Gary Smith system, you don't need to have a guy who's like Alisson back there. I do think that there will be an even bigger role this year, though, for Elliot Panico, who's been the number 2 guy. He emerged as their shootout specialist in the Leagues Cup. They would sub him in the last couple minutes so that he could be the guy saving the penalties, which was kind of interesting because Willis has been a pretty good penalty saver too. Panico's a 4th-year player. He was drafted, or now he's going to be a 5th-year player. He was drafted in their initial draft before their first season, and he's been a guy that they really like and have continued to bring along. And I think as Willis kind of gets up there in years, Panico might kind of have a co-starter status this year, but Willis, I think, still has the job as long as he can kind of prove that he deserves that.
I pulled up some storylines here and made a little chart graphic of some things that we should be following every Saturday. We turn on a random Saturday in April. What should we be watching? A few that I have right here. Can Nashville produce a secondary offensive contributor? Put on your wizard hat. Take out the crystal ball. Is this going to happen? Are there going to be two guys?
Yeah, I think this is the best year that you could predict it in a while because, like I already mentioned, Tyler Boyd has enough of a skill set where he does have the speed that they are losing in Fafa Picault. He's not quite as fast as Picault, but he's close enough. But he has a lot more technical ability than probably anybody other than Mukhtar has had on this team in a long time. And that's not to say other guys can't pass or connect or anything like that. But in terms of clinical ability in the final third, while also having the athletic ability to advance the ball into the final third, they haven't had a guy who can complement Mukhtar or, quite frankly, to give Mukhtar a break. Mukhtar has had to be out there for basically every competitive minute if this team has wanted to win. Boyd can take some of that off of his plate. And even if it means Mukhtar has less of statistically unicorn sort of season like he has for probably 3 of the last 4 years, I think he would trade it for team success and honestly a little bit more rest. And Boyd does feel like the guy who can do it. In my crystal ball, I will not say I guarantee it, but it looks as positive as it has basically at any point in the existence of this team.
I completely agree. Next question is kind of a trick question. Did Nashville improve enough to move up in the standings? Now, we talked about how that a second offensive contributor could help the team, how the defense looks to be, a run it back kind of top in the league. This is kind of a tricky one because I think if we re-rolled the last 15 games of the season 100 times, you'd find 98 better outcomes than what you guys had during last season. And I don't like to use the word luck, but there are certain things, that contribute. There's, teams getting in and out of form, momentum shifts. I just don't see their poor performance being sustainable, if that makes any sense.
No, I totally agree with you. Wes, my co-host, and I on the Club and Country podcast talk a lot about how last year's team basically everything went wrong for the second half of the season, I guess is the simplest way to put it. They still managed to get into the playoffs, but you had injuries to Walker Zimmerman, you had injuries to Jack Mayer, you had injuries less significant, but to Hani Mukhtar as well. There were simple times where they caught the bad end of a result. They caught the bad end of a red card in a couple matches. One of them, Dan Lovitz, I think it was the penultimate game of the season, so he missed that Red Bull decision day game, if I recall correctly. But something where it was a second yellow that was very silly that probably wouldn't have been given by most officials. It's those sorts of things that kind of stacked up. And that's not to say that last year's results weren't deserved, but I think the way that you put it, where if you re-rolled those games 100 times, they'd get a better result in 98 of them is maybe a little too much. I would say maybe 85 of them, they would get a better result, but still they were pretty close to worst case scenario given the quality of the team. And I think that they don't need to get a whole lot better to move up the standings. They just need to have a bit more consistency. There's no guarantee that they'll have more consistency, but I do think it's likely that they have more consistency because it was unlikely that they had as little amount of consistency as they had last season. So I think it would be surprising if they do not end up a little bit higher in the table unless something goes wrong or they were to sell Mukhtar in the summer window, which I don't see them doing at this point, but it is something that
if just the two of those games in that losing streak had different results, if you had gone 6 points higher, you'd have been the 4th seed and you'd have a home playoff game.
Yeah, it was on a razor's edge how they ended up in 7th in the first place, and that was with you don't want to use the word luck. I will because it's a word that everybody understands, but that was with basically as bad of luck as you can get in that stretch as possible, and they still managed to finish 7th. I think with just kind of average luck, they would have had a season that probably sees them 3rd, 4th in the East, and finishing in about the spot that everybody expected them to before the year.
So now let's make our predictions. I think that Nashville is going to produce a second striker. I think that you guys are going to have 2 8-goal contributors, which I think would make a lot of people happy. And I think that you move up 2 spots in the standings. I think that you can finish 5th and win a playoff game Like when I say a playoff game, I mean like a playoff series heading into 2024.
Well, hey, just winning a single one would also be an upgrade. So.
Fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if Surridge really comes good, which I expect just based on what he looked like and the fact that he was good in the League's Cup, I think he can be a secondary complement. You look at Mukhtar is always going to be kind of the center of the Nashville universe for as long as he's here. But when you have Boyd, people can't hone in on Mukhtar quite as much. And I think if Surridge becomes the guy who can just finish some of that stuff that just kind of happens because everybody's focused on those other two, that the offense can really break out. And I think, I don't think a supporter shield type of year is realistic unless they added somebody to somebody better than Drew Yearwood, quite frankly, to be the guy who's connecting the midfield to the attack. But I also think that it's not out of the realm of possibility that they are second, third in the East, and that would be as not as big of a step forward, I think, as it looks on paper because they finished seventh last year. But I think third is probably where I'm going right now, even if there are a lot of teams that seem to have improved more in terms of their personnel in the offseason.
Tim Sullivan from Club and Country Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Let us know one more time where we can find your work.
Yeah, clubcountryusa.com, all social media platforms at Club Country USA, or search on your podcast provider of record, Club Country USA or the Club and Country Podcast.
Thank you guys for tuning in today, Designated Pundits. We are previewing each and every one of the 29 Major League Soccer teams. I think we have 13 left to go after a slew of episodes today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Find us on youtube.com/i80 sports or search the Designated Pundits on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you, Tim, so much for joining us today, and thank you, everyone at home, for watching.